All right, good morning, everyone. This is the Wednesday, June 23rd meeting of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And we are taking up two items today. The first is ZTA 2101, which is bus shelter advertising. And then the second is SRA 2101, which is alcohol production and agritourism. And our first packet are staff memorandums prepared live by Lavu and Juve. So I will turn it to you now, Lavu, to walk us through. Thank you very much for your work preparing our material for today.
Of course. Good morning, everyone. So ZTA 2101 was introduced on March 2nd at the request of the county executive. So a little background for this ZTA. The county was previously part of a franchise agreement with a private company. And in that agreement, they provided both the bus shelter advertising and the bus shelter maintenance. And so now the county executive would like to enter into a licensing agreement rather than a franchise agreement for the advertising space, and then the maintenance will be under a separate license agreement. So that's the background or the impetus for the ZTA. So the issue is that currently a bus shelter sign does not require a permit if it's under an approved franchise agreement, but it still does if it's under a license agreement. So all the ZTA does is add a line in there so that both franchise and license agreements will be covered. So there was a public hearing on April 6th. Nobody spoke. Planning is in support of the ZTA. They did have a quick formatting change that sort of just breaks the sentence up, which council staff recommends approving. That formatting edit makes sense. And other than that, there's no substantive changes to the sign code. The type, size, height, construction, location, all of that is the same. And then the Department of Transportation is also in support. So it's an easy one to start today.
All right. I wish all our ZTAs were so easy.
We like the layups. We like the layups.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I've got really nothing to add to what's been presented here. Any comments from my colleagues? Sounds extremely straightforward. And so I think we can approve this without objection. All right. Very good. Thank you. Well, we're ahead of schedule. How about that? Okay. Thank you, Lavu. Now we'll move to our second item, and that is a proposed subdivision regulation amendment. And the county executive has prepared a change in our development process that is focused on agricultural land that's used for farm alcohol production or agritourism. And we're going to take that up today. Let's see who we have joining us, and I will turn it to you again, Lavu, to introduce our participants for the day. And I think it'd probably be appropriate to hear some comments from the executive branch, some comments from the planning team, and then we'll walk into the packet, perhaps. And council members may wish to make some comments as well. So let me start by turning to you again, Lavu, and Pam, welcome, and ask you to frame it up for us.
Okay. So in that case, I'll start by introducing everybody. I'll see who's on my list compared to who is actually here. So there's Jeremy Kirst, the Director of Office of Agricultural Services, Mike Shuffle, also from the Office of Agricultural Services. We have Casey Anderson, Jason Sartori, and Ben Berbert from the Planning Department. Sorry, Casey's from the Planning Board. Dale Tibbetts, I believe, is here for the County Executive. And then we have Mark Beal and Victor Salazar from the Department of Permitting Services. Do you want to start with the executive or with Office of Ag?
Well, I'll let them decide who speaks first. But yes, let's start with the executive branch. And Dale, would you go first, or would you invite your counterparts?
Well, just a quick word. The executive obviously submitting this subdivision regulation amendment supports agritourism in the agricultural reserve while preserving the character and nature of the ag reserve. we have with us Jeremy Christ, the Director of the Office of Agriculture, and Mike Scheffel, and I believe Mike will lead the presentation or the discussion for this item.
Okay.
Jeremy is joining us from some faraway place, as is it we can do now with the Zoom capability, but Mike will lead the executive branch's presentation.
Okay, well, I would, again, I'll invite Mike to share some overview comments. If you have a presentation, we could certainly walk through that, but we have a packet, we'll walk through to address the issues as they are presented in the packet. But Mike.
Sure, thanks for having me, everybody. Like Dale said, Jeremy's on leave, so he's in St. Mary's County. His internet connection, I think, is spotty at best, so he's going to fill in the gaps if I miss something that he wanted us to cover. So again, thank you for having me. Levo, thank you for preparing a wonderful packet. It was a breath of fresh air to read, a little bit different than some of the packets we have been accustomed to in the past. So thank you. I think you did a fantastic job of summarizing the concerns. So as Dale said, we're here to support a use that was approved by the council back in 2018. There's 2 farm alcohol production ZTAs, one for the ag zones and then the further one for the residential zones, RE1 and RE2. So Hans, we appreciate you being a champion of this cause. We think it's a worthy cause. This SRA is a conversation that has kind of come out of many different avenues and kind of what we in the ag industry have talked about directly. It was out of the Agritourism Study Advisory Committee that met with Park and Planning, other stakeholders, other government agencies that said, okay, here's where we are. Here's some issues that we are dealing with today, and here's what we believe can make these processes a little bit easier so we can truly reap the benefits, the citizenry, the farm businesses can reap the benefits of our wonderful ag reserve. And with that, that's kind of where we are today with the subdivision regulation amendment.
Great. I'll invite planning if they want to share an introductory comment, and then we'll go to Levu to walk through the packet.
Good morning and thank you. Ben Berbert with the Montgomery County Planning Department. Unfortunately, Casey Anderson and Jason Sartori were not able to be here this morning, but I have their fullest wishes and believe I can represent the department well in this. As a planning department, we definitely support the idea of ag tourism. We definitely support the idea of trying to find ways of streamlining process, trying to make it easier to do both agritourism and farm alcohol production. But I do think we have a bit of a concern, particularly on the farm alcohol production side of this. I think with the ag tourism, sort of half of this SRA, we're in full support of it. These are clearly defined in the zoning ordinance as being pretty de minimis additions to farm operations. It's limited to a 10% expansion of activities. A lot of the stuff is actually already exempt from platting or permits, and so I think that to us is a logical next step. Our concern really gets into the farm alcohol production, and it's not even the production itself, it's all the associated uses that come with it, such as the tasting rooms, the kitchens, the on-site sale and operations of these facilities, because in a lot of ways, they really are operating as bars and restaurants. And I think we fully understand that the thing that's unique here is that they are accessory to a farm and that they are using products made on that farm, but they're also attracting large quantities of people, businesses, trucks, cars coming and going. And it seems a little far for us to say that it's a good idea to fully exempt completely from the subdivision process and ultimately platting stuff that's operating at such a high intensity level. And, we've read the packet, and I think we also understand all of the concerns involved, that there is a lot of time and money that is often involved in going through that process. And I think we are committed to finding ways to minimize, to the extent possible, the time and money that's involved in that process. But we just don't feel a full-out exemption is the right way to do that. We have a lot of sort of reasons why. I can stop here if we're just going to do an introduction and probably walk through the packet and get into the details later.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just make a brief comment and then we'll turn it to Levu. First of all, I am really excited about the potential expansion of our alcohol production sector. And I think it has been one of the more interesting, promising developments for a lot of different reasons over the last several years, whether it's quality of life or workforce or placemaking or economic development, economic opportunity for those who have property in the reserve. All of these things are compelling reasons to me to support the growth of the sector. And I am amazed that if you talk to winemakers, they will say Montgomery County has land that is really good for making wine. I've been to walk the fields with Drew Baker at Old Westminster's property in Clarksburg, Burnt Hill, and he showed me the ground that it's full of shale and rock, and he says this is the kind of ground that plants struggle to grow in. It's perfect for grapes. These hillsides are perfect for grapes. We will grow really good wine here. And I think you have to ask yourself, if the ground is great and the region is great, why isn't Montgomery County participating in this sector? Why don't we have a bigger sector? And the answer is very clear. It's the rules that we put in place over the years that are intended to keep them out. And the business model has been functionally illegal, mostly. You can plant vineyards, but you can't have any customers. So I think that's got to change, and we have been changing it steadily. But the executive branch has brought to our attention the need for additional change. Secondly, several years ago, I proposed, actually, I believe, probably not a perfect analogy, but that we would abolish the planning department's role in record plats generally. I was ultimately persuaded not to pursue that, but I think in this case, I think there's a very contained, there's a contained example of a reform that will yield results and at the same time doesn't really bleed out into other areas. So I think we can see how it goes. I don't think it's like a restaurant. I don't think it's like a pharmacy. I don't think it's like commercial uses generally. It's still tied to ag, and it's a win-win-win across the board. So I'm just going to lay it out there very generally. I'm very favorable towards this proposal, but we'll work our way through the details here as we go. I don't know if my colleagues wanted to start off with any prefatory comments, but if not, we'll turn to Mavu. Please take us in.
Okay, so I guess the easiest way to start is to say what the ZTA actually does is currently, if you want a commercial building permit for the building that will house the agritourism accessory use, it's got to be on a plat, which triggers a subdivision process before DPS will issue the permit. And so what the ZTA does is there are certain uses that are exempt from needing to go through that process, and this would add those two uses.
Hey, can I just pause you there, because this is like very technical land use language. There may be a few people who aren't proficient in this, but so I'll try to explain it very simply. Like if you owned a large lot and you wanted to build a second house, but you wanted to divide that lot in two in order to create a second lot, that is a subdivision, right? That is a division of property.
Yes.
And so in this case, if you want to build a facility, if you want to build a tasting room, a building where people can come, you are required to go through certain kinds of property process. And when you have to go through that to record this property, that's when the county gets all kinds of hooks into the entrepreneur. We want you to do this, we want you to do that. And for the most part, those are to achieve, public goals that we have, or entirely to achieve public goals that we have. So it's not a bad thing, but that's the way the process works, is that when you have to make some kind of change to your property, you initiate a process, and then boom, 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 requirements come on to you as the property owner seeking to do something. So in this case, once we trigger that process, that's when all kinds of things start to get put into the requirements. And very broadly, this proposal is to say, let's not do that. let's just not go through those processes. If there are other public objectives, we can find other ways to achieve them, but we don't want to trigger that cascade of requirements. So I just wanted to get that out there for the two people who are not land use attorneys or other people who might be watching, perhaps a reporter somewhere. Okay, please continue. Thank you.
And if I could just add,
Yes,
Mr.
please,
Chairman,
go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
the county does not put actual hooks into you.
Well, it feels like it, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah, but no, yeah. So, but no, I appreciate the explanation. It was helpful. So, yeah, thank you. Continue, Ms. Ndu.
And some of the things that happen in that process are forest conservation, erosion and sediment control, stormwater management, fire, safety, road dedication, impact taxes. The one I think the packet focuses on particularly is that road dedication, because you need to create a road, create a right of way. And those are the things that go with that subdivision process. And I'm sure planning will go into this when they speak again later, but a lot of those things other agencies look into as well, and they're gonna need, in order to get that building permit, those are things that still get looked at and checked. So it's not, if we skip this, there won't be any sewers. That's not the situation. So anyways, so focusing on, I guess I'll jump to, well, I'll do the public hearing. So no one testified in opposition actually at the public hearing. It was mostly other farmers and landowners, generally in support, talking about some of the barriers, because in addition to the county regulations, there's of course state and federal regulations as well. They discussed some of the costs. And again, not all the costs are necessarily the county's fees. In order to go through this process, there's legal fees, there's surveying, there's civil engineers. Like you have to hire a lot of experts to get through this whole process, and it can take a very long time.
So just to put a point on that, it could be six figures for the applicant.
Easily.
And this is not Napa Valley where a winery entrepreneur, it might, it's going to have a multi-million-dollar business, with a global reach. Like this is a nascent industry here that is, I think relatively small scale. And when we put these requirements in, if someone has to make extensive changes to infrastructure because that's what a master plan calls for, that's a lot to load into a business, and I think that's the underlying issue. And we've been contacted by entrepreneurs who say, we don't have the money. Like we can't do that. So again, it's not to say that they don't have building codes and other critical public needs, that they're not met. It's just that the stack of other requirements wouldn't necessarily all be applied. And I think it's worth noting that Loudoun County, which has a huge industry in winemaking and brewing, distilling, I'm told that they don't even have to get a building permit. If you want to do it, you got a building code, you better follow it, go for it. That's how they do it. I'm not suggesting we go that far by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we have to keep the context here, the bigger picture, as to what it takes to have an industry. And maybe we don't want hundreds of wineries. I'm not suggesting we do. But if you're an entrepreneur trying to take a property that isn't, it's a reach to even get into this, getting six figures stacked, several hundreds of $1,000s stacked up into your cost. That's a lot. That's hard to do. So that's where we're at. All right, please continue.
I will note, I did receive, I don't know if I noted this in the packet, but we did also, the council did receive letters in support from the Montgomery County Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board, as well as the Montgomery County Agricultural Advisory Committee. So I just want to note that. So next in the packet is the Planning Board and Planning Staff recommendation. Councilmember Reamer, do you want me to go through the issues first or have Planning go through their recommendations first?
Oh, if you'd please do it. Thank you.
Okay. So the issue is that the way the ZTA is phrased is it talks about agritourism, which is actually in the code called accessory agricultural education and tourism. So this piece is less of an issue because there's already a 10% cap on the total footprint of structures that are allowed for that education and tourism use. So that one, planning and staff, that was a much easier one because it already has that sort of natural cap in terms of exempting them from all of the things we listed earlier about the subdivision process. The issue is with the farm alcohol production. That definition includes tasting rooms, the preparation and sale of food. It includes events like weddings and corporate events, and those are bigger uses. You're looking at more infrastructure for water and septic. You're looking at delivery truck drivers. You're looking at the traffic of visitors. You're looking at parking. And those are the types of things that are usually resolved or looked at when you're going through platting and going through the subdivision process. So planning had 3 recommendations. Again, generally supporting streamlining the process. But their first recommendation was to distinguish between the farm alcohol ancillary uses and the agritourism use. Their second suggestion was that to use the administrative subdivision process instead, and I can go through that, or to delay the SRA and establish a work group. So council staff in reviewing this thought, well, the issue here seems to be that there's going to be a lot of traffic, the number of people going through the ag reserve, but there isn't really a reason to limit a tasting room that's going to have not that many people coming in. So not that much food, not that intense of a use. As we sort of touched on before, it's not quite the same as like a restaurant downtown. And so for that reason, staff recommended doing sort of 2 of planning's suggestions. The first is to limit the farm alcohol production to 100 people. So that's a 100-person occupancy rate for that building. If you're only going to have 100 people in there, you don't need to go through that full subdivision process. You get that exemption. And the reason being 100 people, you're thinking about, it's not necessarily 100 cars for starters, because, there might be 2 to 4 people in a car, particularly for an event. But also it's just not as intense of a use versus say your 300-person wedding, which would be obviously a very large event. And then we do agree that it is a very lengthy, expensive process, and we don't necessarily want to we do want to do something for those bigger, more intense breweries and wineries. And so for that, to use the administrative subdivision process, which is shorter and could be cheaper, maybe not, obviously not as cheap as a full exemption, but would at least be faster. The one flaw in that is because this SRA was introduced to amend a certain section of the subdivision code, it would not really be appropriate to put that amendment regarding the administrative subdivision process in the same SRA. In reviewing this and preparing for this work session, SRA 2002 is scheduled for review later this month by the PHED committee. And that SRA does a whole lot of amendments to the subdivision code, including amending the administrative subdivision section. So if the PHED committee wanted to go with the staff recommendation and say full exemption under 100 people, administrative subdivision over 100 people, all the stakeholders and the people concerned about this SRA wouldn't have to wait to introduce a whole new one, because there's already another SRA coming up where that amendment would make more sense to place in that SRA instead. Does that make sense? I can pause there since I know that wasn't in the packet.
Sure. Well, we could hear comments. I mean, I'll just say, first of all, I appreciate your effort, Navu, to find options for us to consider, and that's really helpful. My concern is that the 100-person limit isn't really workable for the business models that we know want to come in. And 100-person occupancy is actually fairly small. And I wouldn't imagine you could make it work building something, frankly, that small. So you need to go bigger. And I know of certainly those in the pipeline, I think are bigger. So I would just be concerned that while that is it's good, it's an option you've given us, it's not as responsive to the issues that we're experiencing on the ground. Let's hear from colleagues. Andrew, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, appreciate the goal here. I think it's a really important goal. I've certainly been an enthusiastic supporter of making the agricultural reserve economically viable and in providing opportunities for agritourism and particularly for expanding our burgeoning craft beer, wine industries. And I did that work at the state level while a lot of work was being done here. And Chair Reamer, you deserve a lot of credit for really championing those issues at the local level. And I feel really strongly about it. I think it's a great and significant opportunity for us as a county to move forward and to continue the progress of the agricultural reserve, which I feel very strongly about protecting, but has to be able to serve the modern needs of the economy and support the livelihoods of the people who live there and who are sustained by it. I do think there are some legitimate issues that have been raised that I do hope that we can work through. And so I do have a number of questions. Perhaps I could start with planning. First question is, if we approve the proposed exemption, what would we be sacrificing? What real savings might be realized if an applicant if we approve this, given that there still are certain reviews, as was noted by the chair, we're not eliminating all reviews, we're eliminating one of the main administrative hurdles and bureaucratic processes. Can you just share your perspective on that?
Sure, thank you. And I'm no expert on exactly where all the costs and time delays are incurred, but I have been doing subdivisions in Montgomery County for the up-county planning team for about 8 years, and in a lot of ways, our primary review as the planning department is to make a couple of findings. One is the proposed lot or land adequate for the use that's being proposed, and that's a very broad statement that's basically made by looking at all the other reviews as they come in. And so, and the other thing that we review that would probably potentially be sacrificed through this is any right-of-way dedication. And as it's been pointed out, all of the other reviews are still there. Forest conservation would still have to happen, and our office does forest conservation reviews. An APF finding would still need to be made, and typically those are sent back to our office, even if they come in without a subdivision. So our office would still have to make the APF finding. And all of the other agencies, DOT for access permits, the utilities, looking at stormwater, I mean, these are things that aren't going to go away. And most of the plan submittals that we require with a preliminary plan are plans that are used by those other agencies to make those reviews. And so I don't see where you wouldn't still need to, as an applicant, hire a civil engineer and potentially a land use attorney to get through the process, but you're just going to have to go to each of those individual agencies rather than sending it to us through our ePlans portal, where we can then send it out to everybody for review at the same time. And I think some of what's actually lost is if it's going through a subdivision process, we have what we call the Development Review Committee that meets a couple of weeks after plans are distributed, and all the agencies can get together and collectively review the application and see if there's any deficiencies, state what their recommendations for change are. And very often agencies come with recommendations that conflict with each other, and being able to hear that all in one room at one time provides an opportunity to streamline and change those recommendations so that you can actually move forward. I'm really not sure who would serve as that clearinghouse in an event that the planning department were removed from this process. It might end up falling on DPS, in which case they're just going to have to beef up their time and process a little bit to make sure all of this is being handled properly. And so it really does beg to question, like, part of what planning does through subdivision is it makes sure that all of the things that still have to get done are done properly before what in a lot of ways is the final step. We then go before our board and recommend approval of it. And so I'm really not sure that much would be saved. I think the biggest savings that could be realized, and there might be other ways of achieving this savings other than exempting this from platting, would be any potential frontage improvements that came up. And I know that's something that's come up in the past. I know that they can be very expensive depending on what that request is. And maybe there's a way at looking at alternatives to getting full frontage improvements that would save cost. Because I do recognize, when we did some of our research on this, you're right. Loudoun County, Virginia, it's almost the Wild West when it comes to approving these things. But Frederick County, Maryland has a lot of wineries and breweries as well, and they have a process, and they make their clients go through subdivision. And they actually, up until a couple of years ago, made them go through site plan, which we've never actually done or proposed. The only difference I could find in having a very long and very useful conversation with them is that they have a policy that if you're outside of their sort of urban water and sewer service boundary, that they tend to not ask for roadway or other infrastructure improvements of sort of rural area developers, but they still ask for all the plans. The planning department still reviews them, and they still get their full review out of it, which is why I think the administrative subdivision was one of the recommendations that we made. It cuts down a little bit on time, and time definitely saves money, but it's still providing us that opportunity to make sure that all these other agencies' reviews are being done. They're being done properly, they're being coordinated, and potentially being done quicker because, again, you're not potentially having agencies with conflicting comments coming out that are having to be sorted. So I think
appreciate that. Let me just quickly ask, have the other agencies in the executive branch that are part of the development review committee process met with planning and with the Office of Agriculture and with the executive branch to discuss any of this?
It's my understanding they have not. It's one of the recommendations we put forth in the ag tourism study was to have some sort of work group, whether it be formal or informal, that would actually look at, and I think more broadly for all things agricultural reserve related, to figure out, as a county, is our sort of one-size-fits-all approach of how we do things maybe not working, and do all of the agencies maybe have a change to their process, their requirements, their fees, their process when it comes to approving or permitting stuff in the agricultural reserve related to ag tourism and farm alcohol. As far as I've been made aware, we have not had that either organically or been directed to have that conversation. And that was one of our other recommendations, is that we would like to actually engage in that so that maybe all of the agencies collectively can find ways of streamlining their own process so that nobody's actually kind of left out, and we can actually get to the end result of making this a little faster and a little cheaper.
Appreciate that. Well, regardless of what we do here, I think that it is something that needs and should happen. It was part of that study, but it obviously seems like it's an area that should be happening. I see Mr. Scheffel has a comment.
Yeah, if no one else wants to speak, I don't want to jump on anybody else's toes. So if I'm okay to speak, Ben, thank you for that. That was informative. Well, go, Mr. Councilmember Joando, please.
No, I want to hear what you have to say. I just want to ask a question afterwards. So just go ahead.
Thank you. So Ben, you brought up a lot of important points. I just want to hit on several of them. So the subdivision process and everything, all the reviews that go through it are important. When you're building a house, when there's going to be impacts on transportation and schools. In this case, this is a use that's already been approved by the council. It's a limited use that's approved in the zoning code. So we know it's an accessory use to agriculture. It's been approved already. It's codified in state or county code. So in that regard, it's conformance with everything. There's an application that any applicant who wants to do this farm alcohol production must fill out. That application goes to not only the Office of Agriculture, but it goes to the Department of Permitting Services. Mr. Salazar, Mr. Beal are on the call here today. So when we get an application in, not only do Jeremy and I and the Ag Shop talk about it, review it, we reach out to Mark, we reach out to Victor, and we talk about it. Furthermore, we've been having monthly meetings that include our office, DPS, and Park and Planning, particularly Patrick Butler has been on board. So when we have an agritourism question and a farm alcohol production question, we get all agencies on board and we talk about it. This is the right hand is knowing what the left hand is doing. So in that sense, people are on board. different agencies can ask their specific wheelhouse questions, and we can resolve issues before somebody has to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going through this. Like I said, this subdivision isn't increasing density. We're not building a residential structure. We're building a farm building. We're not changing the boundaries of the properties. We're not going to be increasing demands for the schools. It's an agricultural use that's already approved in the code. And that's all I want to put. It's already meeting the demands of the county. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Can I just ask one last follow-up, and then I'll turn to Councilor Jawanda, and then I'd like to come back because I have a couple more questions. But just based on what you've just said, and I appreciate it, I do think a more comprehensive conversation, as was mentioned, would be helpful, where all the stakeholders talk about the broader issues and whether or not there's a better way to handle these matters that are different in the ag reserve. I also will note that there are certain applicable, I'm thinking Windridge, which is not in the ag reserve, it's just outside the ag reserve. And we would want them included, those types of facilities, because there are certain parts of the county that aren't quite in the ag reserve, but may have certain uses that are similar. And, we're going to have to decide how to handle those issues. And I know the right-of-way dedication was a concern that has been raised of, whether or not it was reasonable and appropriate to have the right-of-way dedication that added a significant amount of cost and to that project. So I just wanted to note that. But from issues were raised potentially of somebody needing to kind of be the clearinghouse. It's currently planning through this process. We're eliminating this process if we move forward as proposed, and that would put it on somebody, presumably, as planning has noted. Are there any concerns that Department of Transportation might have on the ability to get dedication, or on Department of Permitting Services on being the potential fallback of spearheading, that clearinghouse role that planning has up to this point taken?
You're addressing your question to MCDOT, Andrew?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Is MCDOT represented here today?
Well, we have.
I do not believe we have DOT here. We do have DPS, though.
To be clear, the dedication occurs through record plat. I don't really know of a way of doing that outside of it. So there would be no dedication without a record plat. And just to be a little clear as well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
The dedication itself, I don't think is really where the big expense is. It's if there's required frontage improvements that occur within the dedication that you really start accruing a large bill, both from engineering and physical construction components, which is why that might be one suggestion to think about is there still a process to get the dedication, but maybe limit the extent or totally limit the actual ability to do frontage improvements. At least you get the land in public ownership so that if there is a project in the future that maybe more comprehensively wants to look at making a suggested upgrade. In the case of the ag reserve, it's often bikeable shoulders that are the expense. Without the dedication, you may not be able to do that at all. At least with dedication, there could be a project, in the future where either the state or county is able to implement a large section of that.
How much of that, just to follow, how much of that would, I was suggesting to DOT, since they're the ones in charge of the roads, so you'd think that, they might have an opinion of whether or not losing the dedication is a problem or not. But how much of the concerns that you've raised are handled through the building permit? That is a pretty substantial process in and of itself that at least presumably covers the impacts of the building in terms of stormwater and all the other dynamics. That might be a question for permitting, but all of the issues that we're talking about here, how much of that would be covered by the building permit?
That's the sort of stuff that if it came in for a commercial building permit, it would not be addressed by us necessarily. But keep in mind, a commercial building permit goes to park and planning for review. A new commercial and a addition commercial permit goes to park and planning for review. Maybe that could be worked out that way, whereas if you don't do the recordation, don't do whatever, but at least they would then, because they get a review, in that building permit application. At that time, then they could look at it and say, well, okay, we need to look at a dedication, or we need to get DOT involved or something of that nature. Maybe that would be the way to look at it.
Appreciate it. I'm a little concerned with the maybes and the hypotheticals.
It would have to be, we would have to coordinate with Park and Planning to make sure that they agree with what I'm saying. I don't want to put them out.
No, I agree with you, and it's more a broader concern of whether or not we're ready to move forward exactly on this. Again, I support the goal. I think that there are some concerns that have been raised that we have to work through, and I think it'd be helpful if some of these conversations happen before we fully move forward. But if you could, I'll turn to Councilmember Jawanda. I've been asking enough questions at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, just continuing along, I think we all three of us, from what I'm hearing, because I'm going third here as far as speaking, agree with the goal. We want to make agritourism and our alcohol production, we've all shared a beverage or two or participated in that, and I look forward to doing more this summer up in our ag reserve. And we want to make it as, without compromising, obviously, health or safety, or having any gaps, right, to the points that Councilmember Friesman was making, any gaps in who's doing what or who's on first. We want to make sure that is happening in the right way. So I just want to say that from the go, that's where I am. I think we want to reduce regulatory burdens where we can, and as long as we have the coverage that we need. And I know you said DPS is on, for example. So just maybe I'll start with the general question. My understanding of this is that if you got rid of the platting process that planning has, you still would have we talked about the roads a little bit, but you still would have the DPS function, right? The building code function and all that. And who's from, you're from DPS, right? You were just speaking just a minute ago here, Mark. And so I guess just going one step deeper into the question, I would like to have the new process figured out before we move, remove a process that's in place. That's kind of, so I want to hear, so respond to that point. I guess you kind of have been, but directly, what are we losing from the folks who don't, I know, and from whoever's advocating for this, and I know on various sides, what do we lose in the current process? Maybe we'll start with DPS and then work our way through planning and ag. I'd like to hear from all of you that if we remove this today, what's the plan tomorrow to make sure that we have all the bases covered?
So if we remove this today, you're not going to be going through the subdivision process or platting process for a new structure that's going through a commercial building permit review. I think there can be some things worked out between us and Park and Planning and the Office of Agriculture to where when that permit were to come in, like I said, they do get a building permit, they get a review of that building permit. And I think there needs to be a little coordination between us and make sure that we can catch it on the back end. The problem is that, if you are saving a little time when it comes to not going through the subdivision process, there's expense involved that you're saving. Park and Planning does get a review on those building permits, and that's something to keep in mind.
Okay. That's helpful. Office of Ag, any comments on Mike, anything on that?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Joanna. So, like I said before, when an applicant comes in, regardless if they're asking for a commercial building permit or not, the review begins the second we get that application. So not only does it go to us, it goes to DPS. So we just had an example where staff of DPS, well and septic, building code, and zoning conformance, as well as staff from Office of Ag, went on site to someone who's looking to do an on-farm brewery and just walked the property, walked in and out of the buildings. So if a commercial building permit would be requested for something of the similar ilk, we would do the same exact thing. We'd go on site, we'd talk to the applicant, we'd say, hey, this is a good idea, no, this is a bad idea. I think in terms of our side of the equation, what we're going to see as if this SRA does pass is that it's just going to save time and money. We have abilities with the ag agencies, depending on the intensity of what the building is and what the applicant's proposing. We can help, we being the ag agencies can help do the engineering for stormwater management. We can help do the engineering for erosion sediment control. And that means the farmer wouldn't have to hire an engineer. They wouldn't have to hire a land use attorney. They would rely on the expertise and the powers given to our agencies to help relieve some of those costs to the farmers.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Ray. I do want to hear what planning says, but go ahead.
Well, I'll put a theory out here and maybe
Sure.
continue with your questions. I think you're asking the same question that I want to hear the answer to, but it sounds to me like we're, when Marriott is coming into downtown Bethesda, there's like an all hands on deck county team that is shepherding that through because it's an economic development priority. And I think that in this case, we would be relying upon our Office of Ag, which has staff to shepherd these projects because it's their economic development priority. And we have staff in this case, because we have an Office of Ag, that actually can do that. And so it's not necessarily the case that other kinds of projects in other realms of the county have a dedicated team for them the way that Ag does. But we have a team there and they can play this coordinating role because that's why we have them. That's sort of what I'm hearing. Isn't necessarily how I thought of it at the beginning, but we'd be
small but mighty team there, But I'm assuming with this you could handle it. I'm assuming is what you sounds like you're saying, Mike.
Yeah, I mean that Hans and Will, thank you for that. Yeah, we basically are the clearinghouse for it. The folks who are interested, they come to us. They say, "Hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. What do I need to know? What are some of the landfalls that might discourage what I'm asking for?" So, like you said, Hans and Will, we say, "Hey, you need to go talk to DPS," or "No, you need to talk to DOT about this." We basically, for all intents and purposes, are that clearinghouse. And I enjoy doing it. I think it's good because, like you said, it's a boon for the economy. And if you permit me to be Jeremy Jr., I just want to talk about a little bit. So we provided you at the council with our first biennial report on farm alcohol production since those ETAs were passed in 2018. So we're just starting to see how much of an economic force this use can be. So since the ZTA was passed, we have 10 businesses up and running. They have 200 part-time and full-time jobs. In the 2 years they've been up and running, $4.5 million of economic contribution has been generated with 28,000 visitors annually. And in the wings, those are 6 businesses waiting. And that's just in 2 short years. And the interest is there, and it's only going to get greater. And we can really start seeing the benefit of the map behind me of the Ag Reserve. So, I mean, we can really start seeing the economic engine that it is.
That was really good. You just have to know them by heart, Mike, and just spit them out with clarity if you want to really be Jeremy Crisp. But you're right there. You're right on the doorstep. Ben, I did want to give you a chance just as I close here. So you heard that. I know we share the similar goals. Just if you could really, the fine point for me is if you're removing a regulatory process, if it can be caught in other places, which was suggested by our previous 2 speakers, and we're not losing anything, for me, it seems like it could be removed. But I really want to know, what are we, if this is true, not to put words in your mouth, what are we losing that is a problem here from your perspective?
Thank you. This almost is just highlighting why I think there needs to be at least a slight pause to have interagency coordination, because I think we feel a little unaware of some of the stuff that's happening kind of behind the scenes between the Department of Ag and DPS. And so it's that, I mean, that's catching me a little bit off guard. I do think, and also, to Mr. Beal's point, we do see commercial building permits. Our review is, have they been through subdivision? Do they have a record plat? That's basically all we're looking at. And so right. If that is all we're supposed to look at, then we might as well not even get the review for commercial building permits for this type of use. If there is something that we are supposed to look at, we need to figure out what that is And how does that not then just become a backhanded subdivision review? You know, I think if something like dedication is deemed to be necessary, I mean, that has to go through subdivision. I mean, maybe there's some process where something gets submitted, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, on the fly, like we have a concept plan process that we use the planning department to submit stuff that's not quite ready for a formal review, but it gets in front of our development review committee. Maybe the farm alcohol producers do that, and that's how we can flag, like, is this a higher or lower profile, you know, issue property, and like metrics could be set to determine that. You know, also interesting to the point of, like, you know, economic development priorities like Marriott, you know, we've created a new process to streamline our reviews and expedite them for that. And, you know, again, that's sort of one of our underlying suggestions is there really should be one agency, and it should be a streamlined, centralized review. From my perspective, from what I'm hearing today, it sounds like there needs to be a little bit of interagency coordination just to figure that out completely, because I don't think everybody's quite aware of what everyone else is even doing right now.
Right, but what I'm trying to, I'm sorry, come right back to you. What I don't understand is, I understand what you're saying is that the review that you do is only the plat, but what is the, other than you not knowing what's happening, you know, what's the harm to the consumer, to the public? You know, I'm fine with you not knowing if it doesn't create any harm, you know. So that's what I'm trying to really get at is what's the value add that planning, what's the indispensable thing that planning provides to this process that cannot be, that you're worried about won't happen if we were to pass this, if hopefully that's clear.
Sure. It sounds like if some other agency is tasked with doing what we do now, which is to act as the centralized place to make sure all the reviews are done and conflicts are worked out prior to opening, if some other agency is fully doing that, then I guess the answer would be there is none.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
Thanks for that. First of all, thanks for the questions. I think you were heading towards the direction that I was going to, so I don't have to ask some of the questions that I was going to answer. In fact, one of them was a question I was trying to answer earlier, and so I appreciate you pinning that down. So a couple things. One, I would just reiterate the fact that the fact that it seems like there's a lack of understanding of who's on first among different agencies is a problem. It's not unique to this one particular policy, and we got to work that out, because we can't continue to move forward where we're in situations where, you know, one entity doesn't know what the other entity is doing. Because to the investor, to the consumer, to the resident, to the citizen, there's just one county government. They don't really care whether it's DPS or DOT or planning or the council or the county executive. You know, to them, it's the government. And, you know, if we aren't talking to each other and knowing exactly what the other is doing, it's an issue. So we definitely need to work that out. I hope that there is a concerted effort. I would think that the county executive could lead on that, maybe deputize the Office of Agriculture to lead that effort. But it definitely needs to happen, not just on this issue, but on all issues related to approvals in and around the ag reserve related to you know, these type of agritourism issues. On this, I am convinced now. I don't think this was quite ready for prime time. I think we've, you know, worked through the sausage through the course of this conversation a little bit to pin certain things down. I still think there's a little bit more work that needs to be done for everybody to understand what the other agency is doing, and perhaps putting that process on paper. I don't know that it needs to be legislated necessarily, but it needs to be known. And the fact that it isn't known, it doesn't seem to be totally memorialized, is, you know, not the way I think we ought to be doing business. So I'm hoping that that can be done, though I don't know that there is an amendment that is needed or any type of formal policy that it requires. On the overarching issue, I think that the staff recommendation is an appropriate one. However, I agree with the chair that 100 is too low of a number. I do think there's a huge gap between something under 100 and a 300 person wedding venue. I think 200 might be an appropriate number that would allow for Most of the facilities that I am familiar with around the state and around the region related to these type of uses where we would exempt, as part of this, up to a facility for 200 people. And then if you're above 200 people, it would go through the regular process. However, I think that there needs to be a lot of work to figure out a streamlined way to handle that process where each government agency understands what the other is doing. I do think there's a difference between 150 person venue where people are casually going to a tasting room, versus a large event space with 400 people in them. I think those are very different uses, very different functions, have very different impacts. So I think staff was headed in the right direction. I think the number there probably too low, at least for my comfort level. And so I would just put that out and see what others think about that, and what the stakeholders who are on here think about it as well.
Okay, well, I'll start. I think we have generally landed that we don't need planning to play this role, and that ag can play the role. There is a question as to what is lost, and I think that it's primarily land dedication. If this was an urbanized area or a suburban area, I would be more concerned about that. But where it is, I'm just not. So that is why I'm comfortable just making this fairly dramatic change, because I think it is workable. I don't think it has pitfalls that, aren't worth the benefit that we'll get from the proposal. And as we've discussed, there's still the opportunity for public needs to be, worked into the process through the codes and other things that have to be followed. So
the only concern that I have, I will say, I generally agree with you. The only concern that I have is this question of, planning having a role, which I think makes sense. And I think that was important. That's why I raised the building permit issue to begin with, which I think is a fairly robust approval process in and of itself. The question is, what are they looking at? What do they have the ability to look at? I'm not, because the stakeholders didn't meet before this meeting, because this stuff hadn't been fleshed out before we decided it. It's not totally clear to me whether or not for a 400 or larger facility, for instance, whether planning is allowed to look at anything besides the check the box that they have done the two things that the applicant needed to do in order to satisfy the legal requirements. And for a large enough facility, to me, that could be appropriate for that conversation to happen. If it's just a coordinating role, I agree with you, it's not needed, because we have the Office of Agriculture, and I agree with you on the, we don't hold enough hands to get folks who want to invest in our county to invest in our county and make the process easy. I love the idea that the Office of Agriculture is going to handle some of these nuanced issues to avoid having to hire lawyers and engineers and architects, et cetera. I mean, I think that is awesome. We should be putting that on steroids and doing that in lots of other applications, but appreciate the fact that Office of Ag is able to do it. I just, that is my only, remaining concern of where I think a cap of some sort, maybe it's 250. I mean, I don't have a specific number to it. I think 100 is definitely too low if we're going to do the cap. So thank you.
Okay, let's hear from colleagues, and we'll hear from the booth. But I just want to reiterate, I think to the extent that there are issues that arise from a larger facility, the commercial building permit is required for any commercial facility. It's not reusing an existing structure. And so there will be a lot of opportunities for the county to say, here are the issues that your proposal is raising, and we need solutions for those. We're not removing that from the process. What we're saying is you don't have to record the plat. You don't have to do this particular land use process. Instead, we're just going to move right on to the building processes. And the implication of that is you can have ag doing some of that work rather than hiring people to do that work, and we would lose the bite at a bite at an apple in terms of land dedication. And again, I'll just say I don't think it's worth hanging on to that bite. I don't think that's a bite we need. I think we got plenty of other bites. So I would just, I know of one venue that is at least 300 people that they're planning. Again, that's not actually a big venue, Like, I don't know what the size of the Rocklands Farm barn is. It's pretty big, actually. So, and that's on a dirt road, like these, I would be very concerned about us trying to draw a line when fundamentally, I think the actual process isn't needed regardless of the size, because we have ways to deal with, the issues that might arise. But LaVue, please, and then to any other colleagues.
I just wanted to add in terms of if the committee is discussing placing a cap and where that cap should be, that there was a House bill last year so that other counties, not Montgomery County, I think like Howard, St. Mary's, Anne Arundel, if there's already a building there, they don't have to apply for a change of occupancy building permit, and the cap for that is 200. That is for an existing building, of course, so 200 isn't an out of the blue number. So I just wanted to let Councilmember Reamer know that.
Yeah.
200 is council staff would say that is not an unreasonable number.
And when you do that, you don't have to apply for a building permit. Is that what you said, I think?
They don't have to, it's not considered a change of occupancy that requires a building permit if the building exists. Yes.
Right. So that was I think the council supported that. I'm sure we did, supported that legislation. We've discussed it in the past. Like, it's a good bill that allows the property owner to say, I've got a barn, I'm going to turn it into a tasting room. I don't have to go through all these intense processes and expenses in order to do that. I can just proceed as I'm reusing an existing structure. And 200 was the cap.
I think Montgomery County, the cap was 99 for Montgomery County, but other counties did 200.
Naturally, we couldn't. Okay, thank you.
If I may, this is Victor from DPS. I really want to go back and emphasize that I don't want you guys to leave with a narrative that the right hand and the left hand don't know what they're doing. Jeremy, Chris, and Mike do a very good job of collecting all the relevant agencies to have, in the beginning, to have these kinds of discussions. So Patrick Butler, who is my colleague and my peer over at Parkett Planning as the up-county chief, we work a lot on a lot of different issues, certified site plans, and if there are a lot of cranes in the county, and we talk about those projects as well. So, Patrick Butler is well aware of what's been going on, and this is no disrespect to you, Ben. And I don't know why the work that Patrick is doing with us and with Jeremy and Mike has not made it to your office. I'm not sure of the reporting cycle, whether he works for you or you're a peer or a staff from the department, but I would just like to say that there is clear communication between all of us, and it is very strong. So if there's anything that's going on up county where all of these discussions are happening, as far as park and planning is concerned, Patrick Butler is very well aware of what's going on. And so I didn't want to leave this discussion with the impression that there really is no discussion and no coordination. It actually is quite the opposite. And unfortunately, Patrick's not here to talk about his perspectives and the things that he has learned as being a part of this. But I just want to make sure that before you guys move on, that I made those comments and made that be known. Thank you.
Just to be clear, I've chatted with Patrick numerous times leading up to this, and I'm actually chatting with him right now. It's not to say he's not coordinating with you guys. He also does not support this SRA. I think I just want to be clear there that there is a lot of concerns that we as an agency, him included, still share with, the direction this is going to take. But, that's kind of water under the bridge. The only other comment I'd make just from what we've heard today, and then I think it's pretty clear the direction council's taking here, but if there's going to be looking at a capacity cap, I actually think 100 is a large venue, and I only say that because I think the way it's written is it's indoor space, and I don't know if I've even been to a winery or brewery that holds 100 people inside. Most of them, it's outside patio, or it's covered space, or it's lawn and amphitheater and all the sort of outdoor stuff that wouldn't be counting towards that capacity cap. In fact, a lot of the places that I've personally visited up in Frederick County, I think the tasting room has like an indoor capacity of like 40 or 50 people, but there's hundreds of people there enjoying it. So I would just sort of say, if there is a desire to do a capacity cap, and I'm not sure there is, it might be worth looking more largely at just total capacity cap, or if it's just indoor space, keeping that in mind when setting what that number might be. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. And I was going to ask Mr. Dewey about that. The cap as proposed, and again, you're saying we need to do a different piece of legislation here on that. But was that total capacity, or is that indoor space?
So the 100 in the SRA was for the indoor space, not the total capacity. And the occupancy limit could be done in this SRA. It's are you going to do an administrative subdivision process for anything above that? That would be
that would need to be.
SRA.
So you could set the limit, but you would just need to set what happens when above that. What happens above that limit in a different process? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think I agree with Andrew in that. I think we all agree we want to move this forward. It's just a matter of where do we set, where will we set that limit? What's the separate process? I'd love to hear back a little more clearly from Ag and DPS of like on paper. I do agree that like, here's what we're going to do. Should this pass, here's what it'll look like. That would help me, and I don't think we need a whole commission, to go back and study it. I just think we need to come back in a number of weeks or, something once that would be my suggestion to my colleagues which I think is not my suggestion. It's Angie, it's Councilman Fried's suggestion maybe, but to come back and articulate that process a little more. And I also would like to kick the tires a little bit and talk a little bit more offline about, the indoor versus outdoor capacity limits and what that other process might look like. So I think it is important to maybe have those conversations a little bit concurrently. Mike, you were trying to say something.
Sure, yeah. So first, I want to thank Victor and Mark. Kind words. We could not do it without those guys and the coordination between everybody's offices. These facilities that currently exist would not be existing if not for all of our efforts combined. So thank you for the kind words. Furthermore, the indoor capacity is just based on the building code. So X amount of square feet is determined per person, and the size of the building equals how much capacity you can have. So if I can be Jeremy Jr. again, Jeremy always says all business decisions in the ag reserve are based on the ability to have a toilet. So what that means is the ground in the ag reserve can create challenges for septic capacity. So someone may have a grand idea that, yes, I want to have a 400-person indoor tasting room. If you can't get the ground to perk to support that level of occupancy, it will never happen. So regardless of these grand plans, we've dealt with several right now that wanted to start out that big, and then lo and behold, the properties that they're looking at could not even come close to that level of occupancy. So that there's natural barriers to these bigger facilities anyway.
That's a good point. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Farmers and council members have something in common. We spend a lot of time dealing with sewage and pipes. And, I once was kidding around about Glenstone, which is an amazing project. It's probably one of the most exciting and interesting things that's happened, in the arts arena in this county in a long time. And I was sort of bragging to my kid. I took him there to drive around. I was like, I had something to do with this, He's like, well, what'd you do, Dad? I said, well, I approved the sewer connection, It's like, that's the glorious job of the council member. Sorry, I'm off track a little bit. I wanted to just articulate the discussion about a cap. Basically, if I understand it, it would be to retain the status quo process for projects that are above a certain number of people. That's functionally what it is. So
Well, the staff recommendation was to create an administrative process, so to slightly streamline that process, but still keep in place a process, but a more, expedited process, the administrative process, which is not the full process that currently exists. So it's not quite the status quo. In order to do that, however, it was noted, as Ms. Nadeau noted earlier, that is part of a separate legislative, policy that is separately before us. I want to say that's 2002, that we could add to that, but we could kind of note that that is the direction we wanted to head, handle it there, move forward with what we're moving forward here, or come back with the answers to the question. I think that's what's before us. But from a practical standpoint, I don't think it's totally accurate to say it's status quo above 200 and it's eliminating below 200. It's a hybrid above 200, and it is eliminating this burden below 200. At least that's what I was suggesting. Can I just add one other thing? I still feel comfortable with moving that forward. I do think, though, I don't want to necessarily come back and have the exact same conversation we were having here. I know there's some disagreement, but I think a joint memo, perhaps, from all the executive agencies, that would be DOT, DPS, Office of Agriculture, and unless, I don't think I'm missing anybody, but if I am, let me know. A joint memo explaining your view of the process as it stands. Who's responsible for what, how it works, when it works, what the timeline is for that. I think it would be really helpful and instructive, and I think providing that both to the council and to planning, before this gets full council approval, just so everybody's on the same page, because we're hearing here that, of course, we're on the same page, and yet it seems like we're not 100% on the same page. And I'll just close by saying I echo all of the amazing kudos to the Office of Agriculture. I think Councilmember Jawanda mentioned small but mighty, which we talk about a lot. I don't think any of this could happen if we didn't have as much faith and appreciation for everything that you and your team does, Jeremy, Mike, and everybody else. So thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
All right. I don't support this proposal that's emerging here. I just want to urge my colleagues to think a bit. First of all, I think in general, we just don't need to go through that. We can create a new process here that doesn't require the subdivision process. There's a lot of other processes that are still required. So I think it is not very risky, satisfactory, and from an economic development perspective, strong, to just say, we're not going to have this as part of the process.
For any number is what you're saying.
Yeah,
for any amount.
Just in general. And then secondly, I would say, I think we're inviting misunderstanding by having a number. And it's not the case, but we're implying that projects below a certain number, because people don't understand what the other processes are that a project have to go through. And so, there will be a reaction of like, oh, they've just, it's a free for all if you're fewer than 200 people. The reality is it's not. You're going to have to go through a building permit. You've got all these things you got to do. So I just think that's a little confusing. But again, I just say I think the risk here is minimal. The upside is substantial. It's a disruption of the normal process that we use, but in this setting, I think it is benefits outweigh the costs. So, I don't support the idea of creating that threshold. And if there's a second vote to just proceed with the county executive's proposal, then we can proceed. If my colleagues prefer, we could ask for the memo that Councilmember Friedson requested, and we can return to this. Our July agenda is extremely packed. We've got a lot of stuff we're trying to do, and we're not even going to be able to get to everything. And I think we would all not want to see this have to get kicked into September. So it's not.
I just to speaking, maybe I'm the second vote here. I always like that position. I'm fine moving it forward to full council with the understanding that we will get that memo before we have to pass it from full council. That's, so if I could slightly modify what you said there.
Thank you. Absolutely, you can. You're the second vote, so you're the chair for this. Yes, we can. It would be the executive's proposal. However, the questions that Councilmember Friedson has raised, the memo that you've asked for, Councilmember Jawando, we would ask that be produced immediately so that this process is, laid clear on paper. I don't know if we got a memo, frankly, from the executive branch. We got testimony, but it might be useful to have a bit more of like a memo kind of laying this out. I do, before we leave though, we need the RE1 and RE2 issue. I believe we would all be in agreement on that. So let's not miss that. We got to make sure we add that to the mix here. But
and I just want to mention too that, with that information, I want to think more about the suggestion from council staff about the shorter administrative process for the capacity limits. I will move this forward for purposes of, so we can move it forward, because I don't want to stop projects, but at full council, I may want to do that. I just want to put that out there. So I just want to, but I think we can move it forward as is for now.
Fair enough. And we'll coordinate with the council president as to the timing of this. I think we want to have a resolution of this before we go on recess. So, you'll need enough time to receive this information and give some further thought to it. Dale, you look like you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, one of the projects that really brought this to light was the Windridge project, who went through the whole process. It's all done. So we have that example, which we can do what they had to go through in order to get the subdivision and the expense that it involved and who they needed to coordinate with. So we'll use that as a template in order to work through what truly was the process that was required, which we'll get to what it is now. And during that, and I think part of this exercise is to figure out how could it be? Could it have been different? Or
what could it be?
As the executive is proposing, that it is completely different by not having to go through this very elaborate process for limited public benefit at the end of the whole thing. After they did all of that, their $150,000 worth of expense, it's still the exact same property. The trees are all in the same place. Everything's all the same. There is a commercial tasting room on the top of a hill. And for that, they had to pay the fee in order to do that. So we'll use that as a template to generate this memo.
Thank you, Dale. Andrew.
Yeah, we all agree on that. I noted it earlier. Nobody wants to make individuals who want to invest in the county have to spend more money than they have to in order to provide what they're looking to provide with no public benefit in return, or virtually no public benefit in return. I would just note, I believe Windridge indoor capacity is 99 people. Is that correct? All right, I'm getting a nod from an actual subject matter expert saying that. I'm suggesting 200, which would mean that you could have twice the size of a Windridge to solve the same problem that we're talking about. So we're all on the same page here of exactly, what we're trying to avoid. The question is, whether we do that. I will just point out, I appreciate the point about indoor versus outdoor. I think they're big different, very different. and I wouldn't include outdoor in it. I think when you're talking about a farm, pick your own and others, I mean, you could have lots of people at a pick your own, hundreds and hundreds of people at a pick your own. If you're talking about Butler's Orchard, there could be 1,000 people there. You're talking about, the Haunted Forest or something like that. I mean, you could have, quite a lot of people. I think the question is, we're talking about an indoor facility, the amount of people at one event at an indoor facility, which, if it's 300 or 400 people at an event in an indoor facility, that is quite different than, a combination of indoor and outdoor. So I just, since I was the person who mentioned, the cap, but raising the cap, I don't want to conflate the outdoor with the indoor. If we were going to do a cap, it has to only be for the building. I'm not familiar of any farm related, agritourism related issue where we would include outdoor as part of a capacity limit. And I'd be very uncomfortable if we started to go in that direction, because, I think that would be, that could be a challenge. Yeah.
But let me say though, what's the reason? I mean, we recognize that if you don't count outdoor users, that you are, you're making it much more likely that any project is going to get subject to this process. But from a community perspective, what is the difference really? If 300 people are coming to the location, 300 people are coming to the location. Why do we care?
Well, I just tried to explain it. The difference is if 350 people or 400 people are coming to an event at 7 p.m., that is quite different than 300 or 400 people coming in over the course of 3 hours, spending time, in smaller groups. Whether we don't care, that's fine, but that is extremely different. When you talk about, when you talk about, impacts and dynamics, that is different.
I guess what I was saying is I fully see the difference of how those events are different, but from our perspective, why would we say just because your building size is a little bit bigger, now you have to go through this when you're actually bringing a similar number of people to the property, even at the same time? It actually doesn't quite make sense to me. It's the people that would be of more public concern than the size of the building. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that is as good of a distinction as I initially thought it was, I guess is what I'm saying.
The infrastructure, well, I keep thinking of what Mike said about the toilets, right? You have 400 people inside or outside, they're still using a toilet.
Exactly.
And to the concerns that's brought up in the memo by Ms. Nadeau, it's like, the issue of capacity and septic and all, the strains on the system, that would seem to be connected to the total number of people.
Correct.
Not just the indoor amount. So I understand your point there.
We have other regulatory processes for those controls. Okay.
Okay.
Can I just ask a couple quick clarifying questions? The memo that is being requested of the executive agencies, is it focusing just on what the current process is or what the proposed process would be, assuming the SRA passes as written as well? And would it be benefit? I think the planning department might want to submit a similar thing, because there are still things that we are going to be involved in post SRA passing, like forest conservation, like review of adequate public facilities. Rustic roads comes to mind as something that we currently help coordinate. Would it be of use to sort of provide that list as well of things that we still need to integrate with, and either integrate through Office of Ag or DPS to do? Like, I still think there needs to be a little bit of conversation that happens before, I guess, this gets to full council to make sure that we aren't missing something.
My intention of the memo, and I specifically said I think it should be submitted to the council and to planning. I figured, given your comments here today, you would be commenting as an agency on that memo. If you want us to formally request the comments on the memo, I'd be happy to ask for that. But the whole point was to both make sure that we're aware as policymakers of what the process currently is, what it's intended to be, and how that would change. That is what I would look to see in that memo. And then you, as a planning department, will see that and can weigh in on, whether or not you think that that is an issue and what it is. I will say the concerns that have been raised up to this point haven't been alarming, as you're, to council members, that planning up to this point has not raised alarming public interest that are being jeopardized as a result of a change to this process. So if there are alarming issues related to the public interest, that would be a good time to share them, because while we might have slight nuanced differences of what we think maybe the best path forward would be here up to this point with frankly somewhat limited information, I think we all agree that there hasn't been a compelling case by the planning department for what public interest is going to be jeopardized if we change from the status quo.
Right, I understand that. I just want to make sure that we are able to make sure we are fully coordinating and agreeing going forward on what the roles will be. And
Yeah. That being said, if you're
all.
changing the process that you're currently involved in, we want you to respond and we want to be clear about what that is and what would be changing. So yes, absolutely want your feedback and input on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, it feels like we're kind of moving this forward and less taking kind of formal votes on specific policy issues. If it's okay, if the packet to the full council can kind of note the conversation, and that I'm supportive also of moving it forward. I am supportive of moving this forward to the full council. I do think that we have some issues to work out, which it sounds like we're going to do, but I don't want it to get held up. And I don't think necessarily that we need another committee session. Once we have these answers, I think we'll be able to move forward relatively quickly. At least that would be my perspective.
Okay, well, we do need to take a vote. I was planning to get to that, and I wanted to make sure it included the RE1, RE2. So Lulu, could you please update that, and then we'll come back and we'll have a summary of what we have discussed, and then we'll vote all together.
So the amendment that was proposed by council members Reamer, Rice, and Glass actually echoes a ZTA from 2018. And basically it just includes those agricultural lands used for farm alcohol production or agritourism that are in the RE1 and RE2 zones. Council staff recommends approval of that amendment, mostly because it's in line with prior ZTAs, so it doesn't make sense to leave them out at this stage.
I'm supportive of that, but can I just ask a clarifying question? Without that amendment, is Windridge included in this SRA?
They would not, because I think they're in the RE1, so they would not.
That's what I thought.
I think they're rural cluster. I thought they're rural cluster.
yeah, I think the RC and RNC zones might want to also be added if you're considering that amendment, which are the other sort of rural zones that I think some of these uses might very much find themselves in, because not all the ag reserve is actually zoned for the ag zone.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just, the folks we're trying to help here wouldn't even be helped by the SRA as it was proposed. So I would suggest that we add in the related zones so that the organization that we were trying to help avoid for the future would actually be helped. It seems to be
Can we ask
better public policy.
Dale about that? I'm not clear if we're trying to help Windridge at this stage or if that is.
No, we're not. It was the example. I'm not trying to suggest that.
Well,
I was just saying that the example that we used wouldn't even have been helped based on the SRA that it was presented and was performed.
Would a simpler way to say would this exemption could be allowed for all zones that allow farm alcohol production?
Well, I think
that's what
zones allow farm alcohol production, don't they?
I can check the table and see. I could do it that way. I can check the table and see which zones. I can't think off the top of my head of a zone that would be a problem, but
I mean, I suppose as long as it is farm alcohol production.
If the use is already allowed, I might shoot this one to Pam.
I'm looking at the table as we speak. Farm alcohol production is a limited conditional use in the AR, R, RC, RNC, RE2, and RE1 zones.
I would move that all of the zones that Mike just listed be included in the committee recommendation.
Second.
That works.
No objection there. Thank you. And if you'll please, Mavu and Pam, just dig a little bit on that and make sure that there aren't any red flags there. I am aware of an example of a company that will benefit, but it's not in any, it's like in RE1 or RE2 or something like that. So, okay. Great. Now, so we're including all zones per Councilmember Friedson's motion that have the use. All right, and then we have a overall committee. We don't have a staff recommendation. We have been talking about supporting the executive's proposed regulation amended to include all zones where the use is allowed, modified with an understanding that we'll get a memorandum from the executive branch with additional details about the process. Planning will weigh in that, either send us a companion memorandum or, be included in that memorandum. And we'll schedule we need to get those memorandums within really 2 weeks, please, so that we'll have time to schedule, before the end of July. We'll seek to have the council president scheduled before the end of July. Council members have indicated that they're, at least Councilmember Juan has indicated he will continue to think about this. I'll allow council members to articulate their own posture here as we have this motion. We don't really make motions at committees, but anyway, that's what we're going to vote on. We're going to vote on what I've just described, which is the executives as amended. So to my colleagues, anything you'd like to say now, and then we'll proceed to a vote. Andrew.
Yeah, I'd like the packet to note that I had put forward the 200, basically staff recommendation, but raising it to 200. There's no vote on that, but that I put it forward if the full council packet, just so that we can return and revisit that issue, and then I will vote with the will of the committee to move this forward. If that's okay with colleagues.
And Ms. Nadeau, are you clear where I am? I think I stated it earlier. But
yes.
Okay.
So the way I have it in my notes is it's 3-0 to move forward, pending and then with possible amendments pending a memo within 2 weeks from OAG and DPS. We'll have to figure out the timing there to give planning a chance to reply to that memo and time to have all of it for my packet, which will be before end of July if there's going to be action this summer.
Right.
Does that sound right?
Correct. Our goal is to allow the council to schedule this for action before August recess.
And I'm sure all that'll change before we find out exactly what's happening. But yes, that is the goal today.
All right, sounds good. Okay, all those in favor, show of hands. Okay, great, unanimous. Thank you. Thank you to everyone participated. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Ben, Mike, Victor, Mark, Pam, Mavu. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.